of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, joining you today from the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Today, I am joined by my colleague Bruce Ralston, Minister of Forests, Cliff Chapman, BC Wildfire Service Director of Operations, and Jonathan Boyd, hydrologist with the River Forecast Centre. We will be sharing an update on the current wildfire situation and drought, which continues to affect people and communities across British Columbia. Many parts of British Columbia experienced showers and cooler weather over the last couple of days. I know that this may give the perception that our drought and wildfire challenges have been eased, but that is not necessarily the case. While the rain did give our hard-working firefighters a chance to take a deep breath, the wildfire and drought situation remains largely unchanged due to the drought conditions we have been seeing since last summer. This is why I am calling on every British Columbian to remain vigilant and continue to follow all regional fire prohibitions and water restrictions. This is also incredibly important. People need to be prepared and have a plan in case they need to evacuate their homes. As of 3 p.m., July 26th, there were approximately 1,060 people under evacuation order and 5,430 people under evacuation alert, most of which are in the central and southeast regions of the province. This week, the Thompson-Nicola Regional District expanded its evacuation order for the Rossmore Lake wildfire to approximately 450 people. Additionally, an evacuation order has been expanded due to the Casper Creek wildfire in the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District. This order now includes about 300 people in the Seton Portage and the Shalath First Nation. In the Regional District of East Kootenay, about 40 people are under evacuation order and more than 340 people are under evacuation alert due to the Horse Thief Creek wildfire, which is about 7 kilometers north of Panorama Mountain Resort. And there are approximately 1,400 people under evacuation alert in the district of Sparwood due to the Ladner Creek wildfire. My thoughts are with everyone that is under an evacuation order or an evacuation alert. I know that this is an extremely stressful and uncertain time. Emergency support services are readily available to lend a helping hand to those who have been evacuated and need assistance. I would like to remind everyone that if your community is placed under an evacuation order, you must evacuate the area immediately. Your local authority or First Nation will provide information on evacuation routes and evacuation reception centers. People must register and attend an evacuation reception center in order to access emergency support services, which includes everything from providing accommodation, food, and transportation to taking care of other essential needs that you may have. It is now possible for people to pre-register with emergency support services online using the evacuee registration and assistance tool. And I encourage everyone, especially those living near wildfires, to pre-register today online at ess.gov.bc.ca. In addition to wildfires, many areas of our province are being affected by severe drought. The province has been working with communities on their water scarcity response planning for many months and is ready to support further planning efforts throughout the drought season. As I mentioned, the recent rainfall we received is much welcome, but it wasn't enough to have a meaningful impact on our drought conditions. As of today, 23 of our province's 34 water basins are in drought level 4 or drought level 5 classification. We are calling on everyone in BC, including residential and industrial water users, to reduce their water usage. Every drop counts. The province is actively monitoring conditions, and we continue to work with communities on drought response planning. We are seeing signs of success in voluntary reductions from licensed water users, and we are grateful to those water licensees who are taking the drought as seriously as we are. At this time, no temporary protection orders have been issued in BC, but they will be issued if required. Additionally, some regulatory bodies have already imposed mandatory measures to conserve water. For example, the BC Energy Regulator, which oversees oil and gas activities in the province, has since May of this year instituted several water withdrawal suspensions from various basins within the Fraser, Peace, and Laird River watersheds due to low water flows in those regions. They are actively monitoring conditions and may impose additional suspensions as they deem necessary. We're also seeing communities across the province increase their water restrictions and conservation measures. But there is more to do, and we know that our farmers and ranchers are experiencing the full impact of this year's drought. That's why, on Tuesday, our government announced funding for a new Access to Feed program that will be delivered in partnership with the BC Cattlemen's Association. Through this program, the Cattlemen's Association will match sellers of hay and feed domestically across Canada and internationally with farmers and producers who need it. The Cattlemen's Association will collaborate with industry partners and local producers to get the right kind of feed to those in need as quickly as possible. Additionally, we are working with our federal partners to strengthen existing support programs to help farmers and ranchers with the cost of hay and feed, which is currently higher than usual due to the drought. Advance payments are available through the Federal Provincial Agri-Stability Program to help producers with drought or wildfire-related income declines. Supporting our producers is absolutely crucial for food security for all of us. Finally, I want to extend my deepest gratitude to the thousands of firefighters and crew members who are on the front lines of fighting wildfires across the province, as well as the emergency management officials and volunteers who are working around the clock to support people impacted by wildfires. On Sunday, I had the honor of greeting 50 of the 100 firefighters from Brazil and extending our thanks on behalf of our province. We are very fortunate to have support from federal partners and international partners, which is bolstering our efforts with much needed resources. I'll now turn it over to Minister Ralston for an update on the wildfire situation.
Thanks very much, Minister Ma. Good morning, everyone. I'm Bruce Ralston, Minister of Forests. Pleased to be here on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Let me dive right in. There are currently 406 wildfires burning across British Columbia. 21 of those are fires of note. Since the beginning of April this year, 1,496 wildfires have burned a total of 1.5 million hectares. For much of this fire season so far, the north has been the center of fire activity in British Columbia. However, as conditions change, we're seeing more wildfire in the Caribou, central interior, and the east and west Kootenays. Our crews are still extremely busy, and we expect them to remain so for the foreseeable future. There are over 3,000 personnel directly engaged in wildfire response across the province today. Of those firefighters, and Minister Ma mentioned this just momentarily, nearly 600 are out-of-province personnel currently in place from British Columbia from the United States, Mexico, Australia, and Brazil. We are excited to welcome additional support from Costa Rica and Ontario this week. Additionally, the Canadian Armed Forces are now on the ground in Vanderhoof and Burns Lake and are assisting with putting out fires that are under control. There are also more than 1,400 locally contracted personnel actively engaged in wildfire response as well. They consist of heavy equipment operators, First Nations crew members, first aid attendants and medics, camp and facility managers, kitchen staff, danger tree assessors, fallers, food services staff, forest industry experts, contract firefighters, pilots, and air support staff, in addition to many other trades and professions. But there's obviously a huge range of engaged and active personnel fighting fires in our province. I want to express my appreciation on behalf of the people of British Columbia to the BC Wildfire Service and other personnel dedicated to responding to the threats posed by wildfires. I'd also like to echo Minister Ma in that given the long-term impacts of drought in British Columbia, the recent rainfall we've experienced has not lessened our concern for wildfires in British Columbia. This weather should not deter you from taking the necessary steps to get prepared for this wildfire season. We can all do our part to help firefighting efforts. I encourage everyone to fire smart their home and property. This can be as simple as cleaning your gutters, mowing your lawn, or making sure that anything combustible is stored at least 10 meters away from your house. There are many great tips in the Fire Smart Homeowner's Guide available through the Fire Smart BC website. I also encourage everyone to review their insurance policy for fire damage. Should your home be in danger of a wildfire, you'll be glad to have already taken these steps. Let me also say that I ask that you please continue to follow open fire prohibitions in your region. You can find more information about prohibitions on the BC Wildfire Service website or mobile app. The website and app are also excellent resources for up-to-date information on the locations and details of all active wildfires in British Columbia. That site and app is renewed virtually hourly, so it's very, very up-to-date. Throughout this fire season, British Columbians have done an incredible job reporting wildfires using the Wildfire app or by calling *5555 from a cell phone. I want to share that our teams on the ground are particularly appreciative of the photos that are shared through the app reports. I strongly encourage everyone to continue and keep that up. Before I turn it back over to Minister Ma, I want to acknowledge the beautiful memorial procession and service for Devon Gale last Saturday in Revelstoke. I was there with Premier Eby. I was extremely moved, as was everyone there, and my thoughts remain with her family. I also want to acknowledge that her BC Wildfire Service colleagues who are feeling this loss deeply, but continue to show up to protect us. Thank you. I'll now turn it back over to Minister Ma.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'll now turn it over to BC Wildfire Service Director of Operations, Cliff Chapman.
Good morning. Thank you, Minister Ma and Minister Ralston. My name is Cliff Chapman. I'm the Director of Provincial Operations for BC Wildfire Service and honored to join you today from the traditional territory of the Secwepemc, where my family live and where I work in Kamloops at our Provincial Wildfire Coordination Center. Slightly different today than what we've done in past media availabilities. I am going to run through a short presentation, which will touch on some of the information already shared by Minister Ralston and Minister Ma, but also looking at some comparative analysis to past seasons, where we're at in 2023, and obviously really focusing on what are the next 6 to 8 weeks potentially going to look like for BC Wildfire Service and really the province of BC as we continue to be challenged by the fire season at hand. Just gonna make that full screen. So we talk about the national situation in past media availabilities, but I just wanted to quickly highlight that, you know, BC is obviously not alone in the fight against a very challenging fire season. I would say Alberta, Quebec, BC, the Yukon, Northwest Territories, as well as all the other agencies have at least experienced a very challenging fire season. It may be shorter than what we're experiencing in BC. Like we've seen in the Maritimes, but we have burnt to date across Canada 12.1 million hectares, which is a significant amount of hectares burnt across the nation. There have been just under 5,000 fires nationally this year. And as of today, there are over 1,000 active fires in Canada, with 650 or so of them still being deemed out of control. Obviously, over 200 of those out of control fires are in BC, so a significant portion of those are in British Columbia. The provincial situation, you know, it is well known now that we're at 1.5 million hectares burned in BC. That is a record for BC. I have a slide on that in a second. So it's a significant amount of area burned. As Minister Ralston stated, primarily that was in the north to begin the fire season, really starting mid-May. And now we're starting to see that shift to the south, and we're starting to see fires like Rossmore Lake that are impacting the southern part of the province and adding hectares, not just in the northern half of the province, as we've seen in the first half of the fire season this year. There have been just under 1,500 wildfires this year in British Columbia. There's 408 active wildfires currently. In the last 7 days, there have been 277 wildfires. And as we've talked about in the past, the amount of lightning that tracked through BC over the course of the last 14 days was significant. Just under, I believe, 100,000 strikes, resulting in significant fire activity really across the province, which leads to my next, or actually, sorry, I'll go to this slide first, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we're doing against many of those fires. Obviously, still having lots of challenges with some of the larger fires, but we have had some success with our new starts that we've seen from that lightning. Here's just a quick graph that demonstrates where we are in 2023 relative to past fire seasons, dating back to 1950. And as you can see, we're at just under or just over 1.5 million hectares, which is a record for BC since 1950. And it's worth noting in here in 2017 and 2018 are highlighted. Those were also two extremely challenging fire seasons for British Columbia. We have now surpassed the amount of hectares burned in both of those seasons. And I think it's worth noting that we are still not into August. And August is still typically a very significant wildfire month for British Columbia. So obviously with lots of fires across the landscape in BC, and they really have impacted all 6 fire centers. So really north to south and east to west within British Columbia, we have seen new starts over the last 10 days. In the last 7 days, there have been 277 wildfires. Of those 277, 70% are either under control, being held, or out. And the majority of them are out, as you can see in the circle graph on the side of this slide. So 52% of the fires that have started and been discovered in the last 7 days are now out, with the majority of the rest being being held or under control, and then roughly 30% are still out of control, and we are actively managing those fires. It is worth noting, with the recent rain in British Columbia, we are seeing a shift of the hazard from the northern part of the province into the southern part of the province, specifically into the southern Caribou, as well as into the entire Kamloops Fire Center and the entire Southeast Fire Center. We also still maintain some hazard on the southern island, southern Vancouver Island, as well as inland coastal areas have pockets of high and extreme hazard as well. We are shifting resources from the northern fires to the southern fires, but rest assured we are leaving resources in place on our northern fires to ensure that they do not pick up again and challenge our efforts, our suppression efforts that we've worked so hard on over the last 2 months. So while we will see resources supporting the south with the increased activity, we are maintaining resources on our northern fires where we have the significant activity over the course of the last 2 months. And when we talk about dryness, it is difficult when we see rain the way that we've seen it over the course of the last 3-4 days. There has been some good rainfall across the province. It has primarily missed the Kamloops and Southeast fire centers, although there has been trace amounts. And it has had a good impact on most of the coastal, Northwest, and Prince George fire centers. Anywhere from 5 to 25 millimeters, in some areas localized, even getting more than that. What I want to stress is that it is not enough to reset the hazard. It is not enough to think that we are not going to experience new starts and very challenging and dynamic fires in the northern half of the province. We have a period of time until we see the return to hot and dry weather next week, where we will have great success with our suppression efforts. We will have great success at trying to turn out of control fires into under control and being held, but the hazard is not gone. The fire season is long from over at this point in time, and we have to be ready for what is typically our hottest and driest month, which is August, and knowing that the hazard may return to the north, and the hazard has not left the bottom half of the province. We maintain high and extreme in the bottom half. The graph on the right here, you can see is precipitation at Vancouver. And although they did receive rain in the last 3 days, you can see that we're still at 40% of normal rainfall for Vancouver. And as you go across the province, the majority of our weather stations are picking up less than normal percentage of rainfall for this point in the year. The map on the left of the screen is just showing sort of the averages, percentage of average precipitation for this point in time. And the yellow and orange colors means that we're somewhere between 40 and 80% of normal in those areas. So we still need to see significant more rain to reset the hazard. This graphic just shows where our conditions are currently. So as you see, the bigger map on the left is total rainfall from July 22nd to July 25th. The shades of blue in this graph are between 2 and 5 millimeters. The shades of green are anywhere from 20 to 60 millimeters of rain. So you can see it has been quite scattered. We have received some rain, but very minimal, where you can see the pockets of blue. And as you can see in the southeast corner of the province, as well as a pocket within the Kamloops and coastal fire centers, there has been zero precipitation measured during the 3 days in which most of the province saw rain. And then on the rest of this, you can sort of just see what it has done to our indices, which are our fire weather numbers that sort of paint a picture of what kind of hazard we're facing and what kind of potential fire season may have. You see on the left is July 21st. You can see all the shades of red means that we were obviously in high hazard, significant chance of large fires and new fires challenging our suppression efforts. As we fast forward 1 week later, you can see that that pocket has shrunk to the southern portion of the Kamloops Fire Center and the southeast, as well as a pocket of fairly dry in the Caribou Fire Center in the center of the province. Build-up index, which is just sort of the fuels being ready to burn. You can see again that a week ago we had a pretty good swath up the spine of the province, up the center of the province in Prince George, Caribou, Kamloops, and southeast. As we transition now a week later, you can see that a lot of that has now focused into southern Caribou, Kamloops, and southeast fire centers. Comparing to recent years, I think it's worth noting we were asked lots how this season compares to 2017, 2018, 2021, very challenging fire seasons for the province of BC. It is only one number. Hectares burned is only one number. And it is not necessarily the biggest variable in what we would deem our most challenging or hardest fire season the province has ever faced. I believe we are on track for that, but obviously the impacts of this fire season have been significant. And just like we saw in 17, 18, and 21, communities are being impacted, resource values are being impacted, critical infrastructure is being threatened and impacted. And so this season is at par with 17, 18, and 21, and we really won't be able to do a full comparative analysis until after the season. But obviously the hectares burned at this point is the most significant fire season we've seen. These numbers just kind of compare where we're at this point in time over the last 6 years, 7 if you include this year. So as you can see in these maps, and again, orange, red, yellows usually means drier, warmer, and higher potential for fires. So you can see we're very much in the same place we were in many of those years. If you look at 17, it's very close to where we are right now in terms of our drought codes. 18 looks very similar, and 2021 also looks very similar. So we are obviously preparing our organization and the thousands of others that are supporting BC Wildfire Service for the next 6 to 8 weeks, knowing that we have the potential for the fire season to continue the challenge. Finally, just a couple quick slides. I just want to remind the public of our social media feeds. We do have our website, bcwildfire.ca. We have a Facebook account, a Twitter account, and a YouTube account. And I really want to stress, please download our app if you haven't been able to so far. It is available on both app stores. It has all the current information on fires. It has a map which you can report fires through as well if you're out and you see smoke. So I encourage everybody to please download our app, as well as have a look at our other social feeds. On YouTube, you will find some videos of how we do what we do when we're working fires, which is we would love for more people to go and view those videos to help understand how we're trying to actively suppress these fires in BC. And finally, on our bcwildfire.ca webpage, there is an integrated map tool. I encourage everybody to try to play with this mapping tool. It has great information for you for fires that are in your area. Every single fire has information attached to it. So you click on the link, or you click on the dot, and you will get information for that fire. So there's 4 tabs of information. There's an overview of the fire. There's details is another tab, so you get more specific details about what's going on the fire. There's a photo video tab, so if there are photos or videos, you can view those. And then there's a more zoomed in map. So I encourage people in BC to go and look. You can find information, as Minister Ralston referenced, it gets updated frequently. The information on our website is close to real time as information comes in from the field. So with that, I look forward to questions, and I will turn it over to the River Forecast Center and Jonathan. So I will stop sharing my screen.
Great. And now we'll hear from Jonathan Boyd with the River Forecast Center.
Thanks, Minister Ma. Slideshow going. Good morning. My name is Jonathan Boyd. I'm a hydrologist with the River Forecast Center. I'm speaking today on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen people, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. Beginning here with just a reminder of the provincial drought levels, how they are determined, and the BC Drought and Water Scarcity Response Plan was most recently revamped in 2021, and switching from a 1 to 4 drought level scale to a level 0, which means that there aren't any real drought concerns, all the way up to level 5. So within that document, there is an explanation about the core drought indicators and their thresholds. And once we get to this time of the year, the main core indicators are the 30-day precipitation percentiles, along with the 7-day average stream flow percentiles. But there are supplemental indicators, and that can be longer range precipitation, so 60 days, 90 days, like Cliff showed in his plot, or even up to a full year. Also, we factor in air temperature, stream temperature, aquifer levels, groundwater. Many more can be still used as a supplemental indicator, but today the focus will be just on the core indicators. So having a look at the 30-day precipitation percentiles last week compared to this week, we saw a drastic improvement, especially for Vancouver Island, the South Coast, Central Coast, North Coast, and we'll say spotty areas in the North Interior, not so much for the South Interior. Unfortunately, it actually went the other way, where the last 30 days is now actually a little bit worse. Just interesting to note, because areas like Vancouver Island or the Central Coast typically are quite dry. We went from last week at exceptionally low for the past 30 days to now being at exceptionally high for the past 30 days, just because that was a very significant rainfall event that passed through primarily on Monday, but it will provide some temporary relief for flows, but not necessarily long-term lasting. If we were to get 2 to 3 more of those events, especially province-wide, we may be able to get out of the drought, but typically that's not what happens at this time of year. So another way to look at precipitation and really drastically shows the drought situation that we're in is looking at the last 365 days. So these two plots on the left is Estevan Point, which is just a little northwest of Tofino. So on the western side of Vancouver Island, an area that gets a lot of precipitation, almost on average 3,000 millimeters, so 3 meters of water per year. And over on the right is Prince George, which averages just a little shy of 600 millimeters. But both these plots show that this past year has been much drier than any previous year recorded. And these graphs have data going back over 100 years. And you can note in a slight uptick just recently there at the end of the graph that it does show that rainfall. We did get the rainfall. It is helpful to have that, but it really is small compared to the big picture. Moving to the stream flow side of things, plotting up the daily stream flow percentiles, again, using last week as a comparison to this week. Last week on the left, 74 stations were at all-time lows for that date. And as of yesterday, it was 68 stations at record lows. So a little bit of an improvement. When you dig into the map a little bit deeper, Vancouver Island and the South Coast and areas around maybe Smithers and Terrace are doing either a little bit better to a lot better. in the short term, and it'll just take a week or so for that rain to actually move through the watershed, move through the rivers, and end up in their final destination, whether that's lakes or the ocean. And the expectation and likelihood is that we'll be back down to those low base flow conditions in the next week or two. So an update to the BC drought levels. These are updated at 9 a.m. on Thursdays. So this is fresh information. There were 3 increases to the provincial drought levels. And the Salmon River near Salmon Arm, there's several salmon rivers in the province, but the one near Salmon Arm is increased to level 5 from level 4. And the Upper Columbia and Similkameen polygons increased to level 4 from level 3. And we're at 9 of the 34 regions are at level 5, another 14 are at level 4. So essentially about 2/3 of the province polygons are at level 4 or higher right now. And in the bottom left is a timeline of the last 2 years and the drought levels across the province. A black arrow just kind of showing where we are right now with July 27th. And we are just so much earlier and so much worse in terms of the drought situation right now than we were in the last 2 years, and really essentially province-wide except for that most northwest area of the province. And finishing off with an outlook, we do expect continued warm weather underway. In the bottom image there, it's just the Environment and Climate Change Canada public weather forecast for Kamloops showing how it's going to be warm. It's not necessarily extreme heat. That city can reach into the mid to high 30s under a big heat wave at this time of year. So we'll say it's more warm weather, definitely above normal and sunny with highs of about 30 to 33 degrees for the upcoming 7 days. The seasonal forecasts from Environment Canada indicate the likelihood of continued warmer than normal summer temperatures, and usually just July and August are dry months with the expectation that there will be declines in stream flows in most regions, particularly return to lower flows for Vancouver Island and the South Coast, and then the continuing decline in the South Interior. And with that, I'm finished, and I can pass it back over to you, Minister Ma.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Now, before we take questions, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge with deep gratitude the work that the media has done in covering this wildfire season. As all of us know, information relating to evacuation alerts and orders is absolutely life-saving. So my gratitude to the work that everyone is doing across the province and getting the word out. By amplifying alerts and orders issued by local governments, as the province does with emergencyinfobc.ca, we're making sure that people get accurate, verified information that is crucial to our response effort and crucial to keeping people and communities safe. So thank you. So we will now take questions. We have spokespeople available from the River Forecast Centre, the Ministry of Forests, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, as well as the BC Wildfire Service.
Thank you. A reminder for reporters on the phone to please press *1 to enter the queue. That's *1 to ask a question. For media in the room, please line up at the microphone provided, and please make sure to provide your full name and outlet. Media will be limited to 1 question and 1 follow-up. We will be starting in the room today. Please go ahead.
All right, Joel Ballard, CBC. There were hikers who went up Mount Bruce earlier this week. That's in Invermere. When they started the hike, there was no wildfire on the mountain. Once they got to the summit, they realized fire had just kicked off. It was quickly growing. They tried to go down, but that was the area that the wildfire was growing, so they had to go back up to the summit. Luckily, they were rescued by a tour operator helicopter. But given all that, I'm wondering, what's the advice to British Columbians right now? Obviously, hiking, being outdoors is a huge recreational pastime in our province. What's the advice if people are out there and they do suddenly find themselves, in a wildfire zone?
I just want to check, did the folks on the line get that question if the mic wasn't on, or?
I believe they did, yes.
Okay, excellent. So first off, my goodness, thank you for sharing that story. I'm so glad to hear that they were able to leave the area safely. I think it is incumbent on all of us to stay calm given the situation, but also to be very prepared and very alert. When people are going into the backcountry, it's extremely important to keep in mind the hazards that the province is facing, and if someone does come across a wildfire, to report it immediately by dialing *5555. Now, I would like to turn it over to the folks from the BC Wildfire Service. Perhaps they may want to add some more on-the-ground practical advice.
It is an excellent question. And as hazard increases in the southern half of BC, I think what I would stress is, and I stressed it during my briefing, please download our app. Your app, there is a button you can press that says near me. It will launch or it will zoom in on your location, and it will tell you which fires are within your area. And then you can look at those fires to look at size and how many resources are on them, and potentially whether or not we have that fire that you might be seeing when you're out in the backcountry. As BC Wildfire Service, we recognize that people want to use the backcountry, they want to hike, they want to camp. And because of the diligence of BC and the public of BC, we have been able to continue to allow those outdoor activities while obviously prohibiting campfires and other categories of fire. But we have left obviously the forest open for recreational use, but you do need to plan ahead. You need to have enough supplies that if you are at the top of that mountain, and this is the first I'm hearing of it, and that does sound extremely scary, that you have supplies that you can sustain while you wait to see kind of, what the situation is for you. So please download our app, know that there's fires in your area, and perhaps you might have to choose a shorter hike or a different hike depending on the situation and depending on the weather that you're experiencing in your area.
Okay, and now I want to turn to the drought situation. We often hear with the drought the concerns about the imminent impacts, what we're seeing for the rest of the summer. What could the long-term impacts look like? We've got the drought situation this year, but we also had last year's drought. What are those long-term impacts going to look like for the rest of the year?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's one that we're grappling with as well, given that the level of drought that we're seeing here in British Columbia today is really quite unprecedented. If you refer back to the slide that Jonathan had showed, this time last year, we had basically maybe level 1, maybe level 2 drought conditions in some parts of the province, not level 4, level 5. And in 2021, that was a year when we thought the drought conditions were very bad for BC, and it was nothing like what we see right now. And so those medium and long-term consequences are something that we are actively trying to understand right now. My ministry has actually stood up a cross-government ministerial working group to identify where our gaps of understanding are and work to actually gather that information so that we can fully understand the picture ahead. What I can say, though, is that it is possible for the drought conditions to carry through the fall and winter into the next year if we don't see the level of rainfall that we need, particularly in the fall. And it's also important to note that even in 2021, the way that we got out of the drought season was with the atmospheric river storms. And that wasn't particularly a pleasant way to get out of a drought situation either. So the future is somewhat unknown, which is also why we're asking people to take action now. We do need those water conservation efforts to begin now. We need people to shift their mindset around the use of water. We're very used to having plenty of access to water here in British Columbia, but with climate change, that's changing very rapidly. I want to check in with the Ministry of Forests just to see if they had anything else that they wanted to offer at this time. I'm seeing a note saying that I covered it, so I'm going to leave it there.
Okay, for our next question, we are going to go to the phones. First on the phones, we have Ben Milger, CTV. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My question is for Cliff Chapman. With so many wildfires of note burning in the central interior and the risk seeming now to shift to southern regions of the province, even with more out-of-province firefighters on the way, do we have enough personnel and resources available to respond should significant wildfire activity ramp up quickly in those southern areas?
Thank you for that question, Ben. The answer that I will give is yes. One thing that BC Wildfire Service, we do all the time, multiple times a week, is we look at the forecast and we look at the fire weather indices, which you saw some graphics of earlier in my briefing. And we look at how many fire starts we believe we might have over the course of the next 7 days. And then we position resources to those highest hazard areas. We move them kind of from all over. So we do have a good contingent of what we call our initial response or initial attack resources, including additional air tankers that we've brought on over the course of the last 3 weeks, additional helicopters. Obviously, we have additional firefighters and firefighting resources in BC from all over the world right now. And a lot of those requests have been in one part to support the North and the fires that they experienced over the last 2 months. But another part of that request was actually preparedness resources, ensuring we have enough resources so that when we have a fire and maybe we don't catch it in that initial response phase when we first discover it, that we have surge resources that we can send to a fire that maybe grows to 100 or 1,000, or like we've seen on Rossmore Lake, 2,600 hectares, so that we have enough resources to put on those fires. So we are continually monitoring that, and essentially twice a week we're looking at our numbers and deciding whether or not we need to request additional resources from the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center. And worth noting on that national map I showed during my presentation that we are starting to see more resource availability from the rest of Canada as BC continues to be challenged in their fire season. Other agencies such as Ontario and sort of Quebec are starting to see a bit of a downturn in their fire season. So we do have some availability, and I believe Minister Ralston mentioned that we do have Ontario staff coming to support us in the next few days. So we do have enough resources, but it is in large part thanks to the communities in BC and the surge of contracted resources, which Minister Ralston spoke to, and the ability for us to have over 1,000 people from BC on different contracts, whether that's aviation assets or heavy equipment and or ground firefighters. We feel that we have enough resources at this time.
Ben, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. I'm not sure whether this is more appropriate for Minister Ma or for Cliff Chapman again, but frequently when evacuation orders are put in place, people tell us they don't intend to leave, either because they don't believe they are in danger or because they want to stay to protect their properties. Can you talk about the risk that this poses not only to those residents, but also crews who may be diverted from fire suppression activities in order to attempt to rescue them?
I think I can start there and pass it over to Cliff Chapman to add, or I'm not sure if Ian from Emergency Management Climate Readiness may also want to add some comments. But what I'll say is I understand, and we all understand, how incredibly stressful it is to be asked to leave your home immediately, everything that you loved, everything that you know, to leave behind your property, your valuables, and potentially your animals and your livestock. But these types of orders, evacuation orders, are not given out lightly. They are issued in order to save lives. And it is not only the lives of those who stay behind that are put at risk when they refuse to evacuate with an evacuation order. It also puts at risk the lives of the responders who are trying to fight the fires, who are repeatedly going back into homes in order to ask people and plead with people to leave. You're putting everybody at risk. I will note that some regional districts, and in particular, I know that the Thompson-Nicola Regional District does this. They actually provide access passes to property owners in order to take care of their livestock or to get their livestock out. The use of these passes is that's the way that you go back to your properties. It allows for the Wildfire Service and the local authorities to understand who is inside the area of risk and who is outside the area of risk. It allows them to coordinate a good time for you to go when the wildfire activity maybe isn't as high. If a property owner needs to access their property in order to take care of livestock or to remove their livestock from dangerous areas, that's the way to do it. It is not to refuse an evacuation order. That just puts everyone at risk. I'll offer the floor over to Cliff Chapman if you'd like to.
Well said, Minister Ma. I think you covered it. What I will say is that we don't take evacuation orders and recommending them lightly. We have individuals, what we call fire behavior specialists in our organization, that are highly trained in observing fire weather and looking at that weather in terms of how it may impact a fire that's on the landscape. And then we are able to look at that through the lens of what could happen in the next 24 hours, the next 36 hours and beyond. That's how we base the evacuation orders and alerts that we recommend to the local government and or the regional district. And we are very quick to look at those alerts and orders once we see a shift in the weather and or a shift in fires activity, and we will shrink those areas when the time is right. And so I recognize that desire for some to stay and be on their property and their livelihood. But we do encourage you to please follow your local government's orders and alerts. It does have the potential to impact our fire response operations, including our aviation assets, depending on what people do when they stay. And I do just want to kind of end by saying thank you to so many people in the northern part of the province and now as we shift south, because we have seen, I would say, more people's willingness to leave their properties than perhaps in years past. And so I just want to thank the public of BC because it has allowed us that time and space for our response operations.
Thank you. And I'll go over to the Ministry of Agriculture and Food for some additional comments on this as well.
Good morning, Mark Raymond, Ministry of Agriculture. And just adding on Cliff's piece there, we do fully appreciate the importance of livestock and people taking care of their livestock. Working with the EMBC, we have a provincial policy in place that supports financial costs related to the relocation and feeding of animals during an evacuation alert stage. So, fully understanding that it takes time to move animals out. So we do have those supports that you can work with your local authority, EOC, to ensure that you have a place to take those animals and feed with the financial livestock relocation policy that we have in place with the province.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark. And before we go on to the next question, I don't usually do this, but I do want to circle back around to the earlier question from Joel of the CBC, because it's very important. Regardless of wildfire activity in the area, Adventure Smart provides planning tips for hikers in the backcountry. It is incredibly important that people who enter into the backcountry are prepared for their trip, regardless of the wildfire activity in the area. So please, that is an additional piece that I think is really important for folks on the ground. Thanks.
For our next question, we're going to Rob Shaw, Check News. Please go ahead.
Well, hi there. I don't have the right terminology to ask this question, but I was just wondering if you could talk about the rules of engagement on sort of fires in layman's terms. As you're moving from the north to the south, like what fires do you choose to respond to back up north as you kind of stretch your resources? And, I think at the start of the season, it was like the threat to structures and a risk of life. And then I heard density of values at some point as a term being used. And I just wondered if you could walk us through how that's evolved to whatever we are now.
We're going to go to Cliff Chapman of the BC Wildfire Service.
Question. And I think it's easily to, I guess it's easy to misconceive kind of when we say we're moving from the north to the south, it feels probably like that means we're going to leave nothing in the north, and that is not the case. So yes, right now we continue to prioritize fires based on BSEMs, which Ian could speak to perhaps after I finish my answer, just to clarify what I'm saying. So it is responder safety, life and property, critical infrastructure, resource values, cultural values, like there is a list which Ian could speak to. And so as we prioritize and as we've heard, there's over 200 out of control fires in BC. And obviously we need to prioritize the responder safety and life and property. We saw that in the north, in particular, as we started to see a shift out of that far northeast corner of the Prince George Fire Center, and we saw the entire Prince George Fire Center sort of have activity, and then it spread over to the Northwest Fire Center with the fires near Houston and Burns Lake, as well as south into the northern part of the Caribou Fire Center. So we saw this huge demand for resources kind of in the northern half of the province about a month ago. And we had to initiate kind of prioritizing wildfires based on potential impacts to life and property, potential impacts to critical infrastructure, potential impacts to wildlife and cultural values. And then obviously we also need to pay attention to the resource values. And when I say that, predominantly that's timber values. And as we know in this province, that is a critical resource for BC. And it is something that we need to prioritize as well in terms of ensuring that we have those resources available for years to come. But at this point in time, as we've shifted resources to the south with the Rossmore Lake fire, with the fires in the Kootenays, we're seeing that potential impact to structures, that potential impact to communities like Sparwood, like Kamloops, like the rural areas that surround some of those communities that I just referenced. And so we are prioritizing resources to those fires. Starts primarily with our aviation assets because they can have a significant impact right away, and then it's followed with ground crews. But part of our resource requesting over the course of the last 3 weeks has been to have additional capacity to continue to support the north. And you heard Minister Ralston speak about the military being in BC. They are continuing to be in the northern half of the province, continuing to work the fire line to ensure that those fires don't pick up again in a couple of weeks' time. So we are leaving resources in the north while we prioritize many of our British Columbia Wildfire Service resources to our new starts and our evolving incidents in the southern half of the province.
Rob, did you have a follow-up?
Sure. Thanks. Just a question about the island for those of us on the island. Like, could someone explain why we have the worst and highest level of drought often, outside of the Peace region, yet we don't really have many fires, all things considered? And I'm not trying to jinx it. I'm just wondering, like, do we have less lightning, or do we knock fires down here more quickly, or are forests not as dry? Or what is the disconnect between the drought here and the sort of relative lack of fires?
Are you looking to take that, Cliff, or should we pass it over to the River Forecast Center?
Yeah, I can take it from the fire. It really has been there's almost been a bubble over the island for the last 2 weeks, as most of BC has experienced, I would say, above normal lightning strikes and thunderstorm activity. It has avoided the island. So we haven't seen that concentrated strike or lightning strike activity that we've seen in the Caribou in the north, and Kamloops and southeast. And so, I mean, I hate saying this out loud, but we've been lucky that we've avoided thunderstorm activity on the island. As you've referenced, there is drought on the island. It had extreme hazard for a lot of time in the last month. With a little bit of recent rainfall, it has dropped a little bit, but there is still hazard on the island. And ideally, we continue to see that lightning shield around the island, but we do have resources available on the island. We hold them there in preparation that we may see lightning strikes there. And finally, I think it's worth noting that it's also because of the public's diligence. It's because we are not having human-caused fires really across the province, but I think in our highest hazard areas, the public is really taking serious this need to not have a human-caused fire in BC that will draw resources away from all the lightning-caused fires that we have right now.
And Jonathan, did you have anything to add to that further?
Yeah, just speaking to the precipitation side of things, earlier in my slide deck, I had a comparison of Estevan Point just northwest of Tofino, and it receives on average about 3,000 millimeters of precipitation, whereas Prince George was just a little under 600. So especially the west side of Vancouver Island is essentially a rainforest and receives so much rain throughout the year that it typically does stay wet. The drought levels, of course, are related to the flows in comparison to their historical flows. So we are seeing that summers are getting drier and warmer. Speaking of warmth as well, just because of the island's proximity to the Pacific Ocean, the temperatures don't necessarily get to the extreme levels that they do in the interior. It's an extreme event on the island if it reaches 30 degrees, whereas I showed earlier that Kamloops, just the upcoming forecast was just another 30-degree week for Kamloops, which is pretty typical for this time of year. So it's a combination for the island that it's usually a lot wetter and in general cooler in the summertime compared to areas in the interior.
For our next question, we're going to Brianna Charlebois, Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much. So sorry if I missed this, but I'm just wondering if you have the statistics for how many properties have been evacuated and how many are on alert currently.
Oh, I can dig it up, but I wonder if Emergency Management Climate Readiness staff member Ian might have it on hand. Go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, and could we repeat the question? It was a little garbled in my end.
It was about number of people under evacuation order and alert, and I actually managed to dig it up in that time. It is as of 3 p.m. yesterday, July 26th, there are approximately 1,060 people under evacuation order, 5,430 people under evacuation alert. Was that your question?
Yes, that's great. Thanks so much. Okay, the other question is, I think Mr. Ralston said we're receiving more aid from Costa Rica and Ontario this week. Hopefully I heard that correctly as well. I'm just curious if that's the case, how many are we expecting and when are they supposed to arrive? Thanks.
Okay. We're going to go to Cliff Chapman for the details on that one.
For the question, so our original ask into Ontario was to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 firefighters, which was going to be for surge capacity for us, knowing that it's going to heat up next week. It doesn't look like we'll get those firefighters, but what we are going to receive from Ontario, I believe this weekend, is we're going to see 2 incident management teams coming from Ontario. Incident management teams are the groups of 10 to 14 people that are highly trained, highly certified, a significant amount of experience on challenging large fires. And they would go in and take over a fire like Rossmore Lake, like Sparwood, and allow for our own incident management teams, which we have 6 in BC that have been very busy for the last 3 months. So we are very excited to see those incident management teams come in. Roughly, we'll see 40 Ontario, what we call incident management team personnel. And we do have a request in for 100 firefighters from Ontario as well. We're just waiting for confirmation whether Ontario will let them go.
We have time for one more question. Our final question today goes to Peter Mitham, Country Life. Please go ahead.
Good morning, thanks. Good to hear about the marginal improvement this week in terms of the drought situation. Understand since mid-July there's been enforcement action by the Ministry of Forest against unlicensed or unauthorized water extractions on Vancouver Island, in particular the Cowichan. Could Connie and or Mark give a specific number of water users that have been issued orders, and in particular agricultural water users who now face alternative situations, perhaps having to truck in water?
Okay. Connie Chapman of the Ministry of Forests.
For the question, yes, regulatory action has been taken on Vancouver Island and in other parts of the province, Thompson, Okanagan, and Kootenays, in regards to unauthorized users. For the province to be able to enact and consider the temporary protection orders, the first step is to really ensure that we are looking at every drop of water within a watershed and within those basins to ensure individuals who are in compliance of the Water Sustainability Act do have the ability to operate their rights as per their approvals and water licenses in that space. Roughly 10 orders were issued in the Coke Silo watershed and another 7, I believe it is, in the Solom watershed. These were issued to unauthorized users. Many of these individuals were provided the opportunity to submit water license applications as part of the existing use groundwater transition period when the Water Sustainability Act came into effect in 2016. The transition period was open for 6 years, and there were direct mailouts and direct phone calls to these individuals requesting that they submit water license applications and come into the alignment of the Act.
Peter, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, and thanks for that. And I guess BC Cattlemen's had mentioned on Tuesday that they're concerned about further curtailments. And I know a couple of folks in the Thompson-Nicola region who are trucking in water, so we're just curious to know if there will be any funding for water users who will have to truck in water, similar to those who are having to truck in hay.
I think we can go to the Ministry of Agriculture and Food to see if they have anything that they wanted to add on this question.
So following the orders that have been going out to the authorized users, the Ministry of Agriculture has been following up with the individuals and providing them a list of resources where they can go to find additional supplies of water. We have just launched today our Beneficial Management Practices program that provides supports for water infrastructure for on-farm, so on-farm storage tanks and such. And similar to, I guess, additional or incremental costs for feed, additional or incremental costs to bring in water for livestock or otherwise is an eligible cost under the agri-stability program that was announced. So.
And that's all the time we have for today. Great. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.